I was an elder in the Jehovah's Witnesses organization for 17 years. 17 years where I held a secret manual in my hands that most members will never see. 17 years where I participated in rituals that looked innocent on the surface, but served a much darker purpose. And today, I'm going to tell you about 4 practices hidden in plain sight at every Kingdom Hall meeting that I now believe open doors to something demonic. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt that something was wrong during those meetings, that cold sensation in your chest, that heaviness that followed you home, you weren't imagining it. It was real. And I'm going to explain why. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I was there. I was in the back rooms during judicial committees. I held the confidential elder's manual, Shepherd the Flock of God, a book that was updated as recently as September 2025 and remains hidden from regular congregation members. I was the person families trusted with their deepest secrets, their darkest confessions. And I was the person who enforced rules that I now understand were never about protecting the flock. They were about protecting the organization. But before I get into the 4 rituals, you need to understand how I got there. Because I wasn't always someone who questioned. I was a true believer. I was born into the organization in 1971. My parents were second-generation witnesses, which meant the religion wasn't just what we did on weekends. It was our entire identity. Every decision, every friendship, every career choice was filtered through Watchtower doctrine. I was baptized at 14, which looking back now seems insane. I was a child making a commitment that would control the rest of my life. But that's what they wanted. Young baptism meant deeper control. By the time I was 25, I was a ministerial servant. By 32, I was appointed as an elder. I remember the night they told me. 3 elders came to my house after a Thursday meeting. They sat in my living room, my wife made coffee, and they told me that the governing body, through the circuit overseer, had approved my appointment. I cried. I actually cried because I thought it was Jehovah's blessing. I thought I had been chosen for something sacred. The first few years were intoxicating. Suddenly I had access to information that regular publishers didn't have. I attended elders' meetings before and after the regular congregation meetings. I received letters marked confidential for elders only from the branch office in New York. I was handed the Shepherd book, that thick manual that outlined how to handle every possible sin, every possible scenario. And I was told explicitly that this book was not to be shared with anyone outside the elder body. Not with my wife, not with my children, not even with ministerial servants who were training to become elders. The secrecy was framed as protection of the congregation's confidentiality, protection of Jehovah's name. But now I understand it was about protecting the organization from accountability. The hierarchy became clear quickly. At the bottom were the publishers, the regular members who went door to door. Above them were the ministerial servants who handled microphones and literature. Then came the elders who made all the real decisions. Above us were the circuit overseers who visit every 6 months to inspect our congregation. Above them were the district overseers, now called regional representatives. And at the very top, untouchable, were the governing body members in New York, 8 men who claimed to be God's sole channel of communication on earth. Every decision flowed down from them. Every doctrine, every policy, every interpretation of Scripture came from those 8 men. And we were told repeatedly that to question them was to question Jehovah himself. Independent thinking was labeled as dangerous, even demonic. But here's what I didn't realize at the time. Every ritual, every meeting structure, every seemingly innocent practice was designed to reinforce that control. And 4 of those practices, the ones I'm about to reveal, go deeper than control. They create spiritual openness, a vulnerability that I now believe invites demonic influence. If that sounds extreme, stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why I use that word. The first ritual is what I call the repetition incantation. Let me explain what happens at every single Kingdom Hall meeting. Twice a week, members gather for structured worship. On weekends, there's the public talk, followed by the Watchtower study. On weekday evenings, there's the midweek meeting. Every meeting follows the exact same format, dictated by headquarters in New York, the same schedule worldwide, the same material studied on the same week, the same songs sung from the same songbook. And here's where it gets dark. The Watchtower study involves reading a magazine article paragraph by paragraph, then answering pre-written questions with pre-written answers. Let me paint the picture for you. You're sitting in a Kingdom Hall. The seats are arranged in rows facing a platform. There's no cross, no religious imagery, just a plain functional room. The Watchtower conductor, usually an elder, reads a paragraph from the magazine. Then he asks the printed question at the bottom. Hands go up. He calls on someone. That person reads the answer, almost word for word, from the paragraph that was just read. The conductor says, "Thank you, brother," or "Thank you, sister." And this repeats for an hour. Paragraph, question, answer, thank you. Paragraph, question, answer, thank you. 50, 60, 70 times in a single meeting. You might think this is just boring religious education, but I need you to understand something I learned years later when I started researching mind control. This is a textbook thought-stopping technique. Repetition of doctrine without critical analysis, rewarding regurgitation over questioning, creating a mental loop where the same ideas are cycled through your brain over and over until they become automatic. It's not education, it's programming. And when I was an elder, I was the one facilitating it. I was the one conducting those studies, reinforcing those patterns, praising people for giving back exactly what they'd been told. But here's what I didn't see until I left. This kind of repetition doesn't just program the mind, it opens the spirit. In occult practices, repetition of phrases is called incantation, mantras, chants. The goal is to bypass the conscious mind and create an altered state where outside influence can enter. And that's exactly what these meetings did. After an hour of repetitive, monotonous call and response, people's critical thinking shut down, their defenses lowered, and whatever doctrine was being taught, no matter how illogical, no matter how harmful, went in without resistance. I saw it happen to families for years. I saw intelligent people, educated people, accept teachings that contradicted basic logic because they'd been conditioned through repetition to stop questioning. And here's the part that haunts me most. During those Watchtower studies, we weren't just repeating human ideas. We were repeating doctrines that isolated members from their families, that covered up abuse, that taught that only Jehovah's Witnesses would survive Armageddon while everyone else would be destroyed. We were repeating beliefs that caused parents to shun their own children, that prevented victims from going to the police, that kept people trapped in psychological prisons. And every time we repeated those ideas, we strengthened their hold, not just mentally, spiritually. If you've ever been in one of those meetings and felt that strange heaviness, that sense of oppression, that wasn't Jehovah's spirit. That was something else entirely. I remember a sister named Jennifer. She was 28, newly married, and she started missing meetings. When the elders, including me, went to visit her, she was pale and exhausted. She told us she couldn't sleep after meetings. She said she felt watched, like something dark was in her apartment. We told her it was Satan attacking her because she was weak spiritually. We told her the solution was to attend more meetings, study more, pray more. So she did. And she got worse. Within 6 months, she was having panic attacks during Watchtower studies. She'd have to leave and sit in the bathroom, hyperventilating. And we, the elders, told her it was her fault, that she wasn't praying enough, that she needed to strengthen her faith. Jennifer eventually left the organization. She was disfellowshipped for causing divisions when she tried to tell other sisters what she was experiencing. I found out years later, after I'd left, that she'd gone to a counselor who specialized in religious trauma. The counselor explained that what she'd experienced was a trauma response to psychological manipulation. But Jennifer told me something else. She said the oppression stopped the day she stopped attending meetings. Completely stopped, like a door had closed. And she said she now believes that those meetings, that repetition, had opened her to something that fed on control and fear. I didn't believe her then, but I believe her now. The second ritual is the enforced confession system, and this one is even darker because it happens behind closed doors. Now, let me explain how the judicial committee process works. When someone in the congregation commits what the organization defines as a serious sin, adultery, fornication, apostasy, celebrating a birthday or Christmas, watching pornography, even something as simple as questioning Watchtower doctrine, the elders form a judicial committee. This committee consists of 3 elders who meet with the accused in a private room, usually at the Kingdom Hall, usually in the evening when no one else is around. The Shepherd, the Flock of God manual outlines exactly how these meetings are supposed to go. The accused is called in. They sit facing 3 elders, and the elders ask detailed, invasive questions about what happened. If it's a sexual sin, they ask explicit details. How many times? What positions? Whether there was pleasure. I'm not exaggerating. The manual instructs elders to determine porneia versus other levels of sexual contact, and that requires graphic questioning. The person has to confess everything, every detail, every thought. Because only through complete confession can they supposedly receive Jehovah's mercy. But here's what the manual also says. Everything discussed in that room is confidential. It cannot be shared with anyone outside the elder body, including the person's own family. The elders contact the branch office in New York first before making any decisions, especially in cases involving child abuse. And here's the demonic part. Even if the person confesses to abusing a child, unless there are 2 witnesses to the abuse, no action is taken. It's called the 2-witness rule, based on a misapplication of Deuteronomy 19:15. If a child reports abuse and there's no second witness, the elders are instructed not to form a judicial committee. The abuser stays in the congregation. The child is told to be quiet, to wait on Jehovah, to not bring reproach on Jehovah's name by going to police. I was part of judicial committees that dealt with child abuse, 3 times in my 17 years, and every single time we followed the manual. We called New York, we applied the 2-witness rule, and every single time the abuser remained in the congregation because there wasn't a second witness. One of those cases involved a girl named Melissa. She was 12 years old. Her stepfather had been molesting her for 2 years. She finally told her mother. Her mother went to the elders. We formed a committee, interviewed Melissa separately, asked her to describe what happened. She was shaking. She could barely speak. Then we interviewed the stepfather. He denied everything. We had one witness, Melissa, no second witness. We called the branch office. They told us we couldn't take judicial action. They told us it was a family matter. They told us to encourage Melissa to pray and that Jehovah would bring justice in due time. Melissa's stepfather continued attending meetings. He continued going door to door in field service. He continued being introduced to families as a brother in good standing. And Melissa stopped attending meetings entirely within a year. Her mother stayed in the organization, torn between her daughter and her faith. And I, along with the other elders, went home and told our wives we'd handled a confidential matter, but couldn't discuss details. We prayed that night, asking Jehovah to bless our decision. And I felt nothing. No peace. No confirmation. Just a hollow emptiness. Looking back now, I realize what we'd done. We hadn't just failed to protect a child. We'd participated in a system that spiritually empowers abusers. Because here's the thing about forced confession in a closed room. It's not biblical accountability. It's ritual control. In ancient pagan religions, priests heard confessions in secret and used that information to maintain power over people. The Catholic confessional does this, and the Jehovah's Witness Judicial Committee does it on an even more invasive level. Because unlike Catholics, who can confess anonymously, Jehovah's Witnesses confess face-to-face with men who will control their social standing, their family relationships, their entire future in the organization. And when that confession system is used to protect abusers, when it's used to silence victims, that's not just organizational failure, that's demonic. Because it creates an environment where predators are protected and victims are sacrificed. It inverts justice. It calls evil good and good evil. And every time an elder participates in that system, every time they sit in that room and apply those rules, they're opening a door to something that feeds on suffering. If you're a victim of abuse in the Jehovah's Witnesses organization and you were told to be quiet, to not go to police, to wait on Jehovah, I need you to hear this. It wasn't your fault. The system was designed to protect the organization, not you. And the elders who enforced that system, including me, were either willfully complicit or spiritually blind. Either way, we failed you. And I am so sorry. The third ritual is what I call the spiritual surveillance network. Let me explain how information flows in a congregation. Every congregation has a territory, a geographic area where members live and preach. Members are assigned to that congregation based on where they reside. And within that congregation, there's an invisible but very real system of monitoring. Elders take notes on who attends meetings and who doesn't. If you miss 3 meetings in a row, you get a phone call. If you miss more than that, you get a shepherding visit. 2 elders come to your home to encourage you. But it goes deeper. Members are encouraged, subtly but consistently, to report on each other. If you see a brother or a sister doing something untheocratic, spending time with disfellowshipped family, watching R-rated movies, going to a club, even something as innocent as growing a beard in some congregations, you're encouraged to talk to the elders. It's framed as loving concern. But in practice, it creates a culture of suspicion. Everyone is watching everyone. And if you step out of line, someone will report you. I participated in this system for years. I received reports from concerned publishers about other members. I took those reports seriously. I investigated. I confronted people based on secondhand information. And I genuinely believed I was protecting the congregation from bad influences. But here's what I didn't realize. This system mirrors totalitarian state surveillance. It's the same tactic used by oppressive governments to control populations, create fear that anyone could be watching, reward informants, punish dissent. And suddenly, people police themselves. They stop expressing doubts. They stop asking questions. They conform out of fear. And here's the spiritual component. This kind of surveillance doesn't just control behavior. It fragments the soul. It teaches people to perform rather than be authentic. You're not worshiping because you want to. You're performing righteousness because you're being watched. And that performance, that constant hypocrisy, that split between who you are and who you pretend to be, it creates a spiritual opening because you can't maintain that kind of duplicity without something breaking inside. And when you break, when your sense of self fractures, you become vulnerable to influence, both psychological and spiritual. I watched this happen to a brother named David. He was in his early 40s, married with 3 kids, and he was burning out. He'd been a ministerial servant for 10 years, working full-time while pioneering, putting in 70 hours a month in door-to-door preaching. He was exhausted, but every time he tried to slow down, he got visits from elders telling him he needed to reach out for elder appointment, that his family was watching, that Jehovah expected more. So he kept going, he kept performing. And then one day, someone reported seeing him at a bar with a coworker, just having a beer after work, nothing immoral. But it was reported. We formed a committee to discuss whether his behavior was stumbling others. We didn't call it a judicial committee because he hadn't committed a disfellowshipping offense, but we interrogated him anyway. Why was he at a bar? Didn't he know how it looked? What if a worldly person had seen him and thought Jehovah's Witnesses were hypocrites? David broke down. He said he couldn't breathe in the organization anymore. He said he felt like he was being watched every second of his life. He said he was having thoughts about ending his life because he couldn't keep up the performance. We told him to pray more, to trust in Jehovah, to remember that Satan was attacking him because he was spiritually strong. We told him the surveillance was loving concern, not control. And then we removed him as a ministerial servant because he wasn't setting a good example. David stopped attending meetings 6 months later. His wife divorced him and got custody of the kids because he was spiritually weak. And I heard, years after I'd left, that David had attempted suicide twice. He survived, thankfully. But he told someone who told me that he still feels like he's being watched. That even though he's been out of the organization for years, he can't shake the feeling that someone is reporting on him, judging him, waiting for him to fail. That's what spiritual surveillance does. It doesn't just control behavior in the present, it traumatizes people so deeply that they carry that hypervigilance for years, maybe forever. And that trauma, that constant state of fear and performance, it's a spiritual wound. And spiritual wounds, if left untreated, become entry points for oppression. The fourth and final ritual is the most insidious because it's the one that seems most biblical on the surface. It's the isolation through shunning. Disfellowshipping is the official term. When someone is disfellowshipped, an announcement is made at the midweek meeting. The elder stands on the platform and says, "Brother John Smith is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses," or "Sister Mary Jones has been disfellowshipped." No explanation is given, no details, just that announcement. And from that moment, every single member of the congregation is required to completely shun that person. No conversations, no text messages, no phone calls. If you see them on the street, you don't acknowledge them. If they're your family member, you cut off all but the most essential communication. Parents shun their adult children. Children shun their parents. Siblings become strangers. And this shunning continues unless and until the person is reinstated, which requires months or years of attending every meeting, sitting in the back, being ignored by everyone, and submitting letters to the elders begging to come back. It's described as loving discipline, a way to shock the person into repentance. But let me tell you what it actually is. It's spiritual and emotional death. I enforced this policy hundreds of times. I made the announcements. I counseled families who were struggling with shunning their disfellowshipped children. I told grieving mothers that cutting off their sons was what Jehovah required. I told heartbroken fathers that refusing to attend their daughter's wedding was an act of faithfulness, and I genuinely believed I was doing God's will. But here's what I didn't understand then. Shunning is not biblical correction. It's cult control. Because the threat of losing everyone you've ever loved, everyone you've ever known, your entire social structure and identity, that threat keeps people trapped even when they desperately want to leave, even when they know something is wrong, even when they're being abused. I saw this with a young woman named Sarah. She was 19, born and raised in the organization, and she was being sexually harassed by an elder in the congregation. He was 53, married, and he'd been sending her inappropriate messages for months. She finally told her parents. Her parents went to the other elders. We investigated, and the elder admitted it. He said he'd been struggling with temptation, that Sarah had been dressing immodestly, that it was partly her fault. We disfellowshipped him. But here's what happened next. Sarah started having doubts. She started researching the organization online. She found out about the child abuse cases, the false prophecies, the doctrinal changes. And she told her parents she didn't think it was the truth anymore. Her parents immediately reported her to the elders. We met with her. We asked if she believed the governing body was God's channel. She said no. We asked if she believed Jehovah's Witnesses were the only true religion. She said no. We asked if she was willing to stop expressing doubts and submit to organizational authority. She said no. So we disfellowshipped her for apostasy. She was 19 years old, and from that day, her parents, her siblings, her cousins, her grandparents, every friend she'd ever had, all of them stopped speaking to her. She tried to kill herself 3 weeks later. She survived because a neighbor found her. But she told me later, after I'd left and reached out to apologize, that the worst part wasn't being shunned. It was knowing that her family believed God wanted them to shun her, that the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally had chosen an organization over her. That's demonic, not in the metaphorical sense, in the actual spiritual sense, because love is from God. And anything that teaches people to withhold love as a weapon, to use isolation as torture, to prioritize institutional loyalty over human connection, that's not from God, that's from something else. And when elders enforce that system, when they announce disfellowshippings and watch families tear themselves apart and call it loyal love, they're not serving God, They're serving a system that feeds on broken relationships and destroyed lives. Here's what all 4 of these rituals have in common. They create spiritual vulnerability through psychological control. The repetition shuts down critical thinking and opens the mind to programming. The forced confession system protects predators and empowers abuse. The surveillance network fragments identity and creates constant fear. And the shunning isolates people from any support system that might help them escape. Together, these practices don't just control behavior, they damage the soul. They create wounds that invite oppression. And they do it all while claiming to represent God. I spent 17 years as an elder, 17 years participating in these rituals, enforcing these systems, believing I was doing God's work. And here's what I've learned since leaving. Jehovah's Witnesses aren't just a high-control religion. They're a spiritually abusive system that uses biblical language to justify practices that are fundamentally anti-Christian. Because Christianity, real Christianity, is supposed to be about freedom, about grace, about love that doesn't demand performance or punish questions or destroy families. But the Jehovah's Witnesses organization has taken those concepts and twisted them into tools of control. And if you're watching this and you feel that wrongness in your gut, that sense that something isn't right, trust that. That's not Satan trying to deceive you. That's your conscience, your spirit, your God-given sense of justice telling you the truth. You're not crazy, you're not spiritually weak, you're not under demonic attack because you have doubts, you're waking up. And waking up is the first step toward freedom. Since I left the organization, I've had to rebuild everything. My faith, my identity, my understanding of God. And I've had to confront the damage I caused as an elder, the people I hurt, the systems I enforced, the rituals I participated in. I can't undo that, but I can warn others. I can tell you what I saw behind the curtain, and I can tell you that there is life after the organization. There is healing. There is authentic faith that doesn't require performance or surveillance or shunning or mind control. If this resonated with you, if you've experienced any of what I described, leave a comment. You're not alone. If you're thinking about leaving, know that there are resources and support systems and people like me who made it out and want to help others do the same. And if you're angry at me for calling these practices demonic, I understand. I would have been angry too when I was still in. But I'm asking you to consider the possibility that what you've been taught is love might actually be control. And what you've been taught is truth might actually be deception. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And if you feel like this message needs to reach someone else, someone still trapped, someone who needs to hear they're not crazy, share this. Because the only way these systems lose power is when people stop being afraid to talk about them. Subscribe if you want to hear more about my journey out, about the healing process, about what faith looks like on the other side of control. And remember, you are not alone. You were never alone. And freedom is possible.